Another option for your art project is creating a dragon eye drawing. You can also use watercolor for this project. First, I'm going to start on the left bottom side of my paper. I'm going to curve up to the top right side of my paper. And then I'm going to come down and connect to the point where I started. Then I am going to create two curves for the iris of the eye, the colored part of your eye. And instead of doing a circle for the pupil, I'm going to do a diamond type shape, but instead of using a straight line to connect each point of the diamond, I'm doing a small curve. I'm going to add some small highlights. You could do the highlights with circles, triangles, curved rectangles, any of those will work. And then a curve for the inner corner of the eye. For the scales, I decided to do curved scales. You could also do triangular pointed scales. I'm going to do almost a rainbow all the way around my eye. So a rainbow curve, almost like flower petals around my eye. Then from the middle of each curve, so the very top of each curve, that's where I'm going to start my next row of scales. So from one top of a rainbow to the other top of the rainbow, that's where I'm going to start and stop my curves. I'm going to repeat this step all over until my paper is full of scales. Then I'm going to trace over pretty much everything on my drawing. The only areas I decided not to trace were my highlights because I wanted those to stay really white. So I'm using an Expo. You could also use a Sharpie marker. Any alcohol-based marker would work great. I recommend if you're going to use watercolor, I would not use any water-based markers. Make sure it is not water-based. That way your lines don't bleed. So I'm going to continue tracing over all of my lines with my Expo marker. Then I'm going to color in my eye. I decided for this project, I'm going to use sets of analogous colors. Analogous colors are colors next to each other on the color wheel. So looking at my colors I even have them put down in order. I have yellow, green, blue. Those are all colors next to each other in the rainbow or in the color wheel. I'm starting with my yellow, and I'm almost doing a tie-dye technique to create the coloration in the iris. So I'm going back and forth with my yellow to prevent my pencil lines from showing up too much in my highlights. I decided to erase a little bit of the pencil. And you'll see a little bit better with my green because it's a little darker, my back and forth motion that I'm doing. And then I'm stopping wherever I am meeting the highlights, being very careful not to go on top of them, and doing that back and forth motion some more. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side, almost like a little scribble river, going back and forth, stopping at my highlights, making sure I don't go on top of them, and continuing that little scribble river down to the bottom. To prevent from going on top of my highlights, sometimes I will outline little areas so I don't accidentally go on top. I'll repeat that with my dark green or my blue-green, and then I'll do the same thing with my blue. Next, for the watercolor, I decided to use a different set of analogous colors. So these colors that are next to each other are red, orange, and yellow. I thought these would stand out against from the blues and the greens of my eye. So I'm starting with the darkest color, red, and these are going to be the colors right next to my eye. So I'm going to start by just filling in a scale with red, and I want this to be as solid as possible. So I wet my brush, I wiggle in my red paint, and then I will spread that all over each scale. Sometimes to prevent from going outside my scale, I'll do a little border around the outside, and then I'll fill in the inside so I don't go out. And if your brush is ever kind of scratchy, it means it needs a little more water, so just dip back in the water and back into your paint. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of black. I thought this red was a little too bright, so I wanted to add some shadow around the eye. So I'm just going to do a line right where the red is starting to touch my black line around the eye. And while my paint is all still wet, I didn't wait too long before I did the black. So while my paint is still wet, I'm going to blend the red into the black. You can do this two ways. After you put down this black line, and I'll do this with a couple scales, I can dip with my wet brush, or I can dip back into my red and blend the black with the red. And if it's ever looking too dark, you can just dip back into your red paint and add some more of that red paint in. And I'm going to repeat this on all my other scales. Next, I'm moving on to the next color, which is orange. So I'm wetting my brush, wetting the orange paint, and then filling in all of my scales orange. If you ever need to upgrade to a larger brush, that is totally okay. Sometimes you'll find if you have a really, really wet area next to another wet area, just like I do right there, you'll need to get a paper towel and dab. I'm just dabbing that area with my paper towel so it does not spread even more. And then I just take my wet brush, blend out where that paper towel line was, and if I need to, I can let this area dry, come back and do another layer. But I was able to get most of the puddle off, so I can go ahead and add another layer right now. I'm going to finish painting all of my other scales orange. And for my shadow, just like I did with my black on my red scales, I'm going to dip into my red. This will kind of tie into the previous red and make like a nice rainbow transition from red to orange and then eventually to yellow. So I'm blending the same way I blended my black. I put down my stripe of red, and then I'm dipping back into my orange or dipping back into my water and blending where the red is touching the orange. And I'm being very gentle with my brush. I don't want to be pushing too hard or else that's going to start ripping and eating up your paper. So now I painted all of my other scales yellow, and I'm shading these scales with the orange, the same way I did with my red and the same way I did with my black. And that's it. Once you have all those scales shaded in, that is your masterpiece of your dragon eye. Make some awesome art. Can't wait to see what you'll make.